Elaine, when your husband was killed, your children were 7 and 9.
Yes.
And a lot of the burden falls on the mum. And it must be a pretty tough time coping with your own grief and 2 young children. How was it?
It was difficult. The only way I can describe it, and I'm sure lots of people have, is it's just like being plunged into a hole and you're overcome with the grief, but you have to put that aside as a parent and concentrate on the children. I had lost my parents in my 20s. They both died in their 40s quite suddenly. So I had some idea of what the children would be going through. It's very disorientating. It's a loss, I think, unless you've lost a parent that you don't understand. It's not the same as losing a grandparent. It's your point of reference. So I knew in some ways how lost they would be feeling, how disorientated, and I needed to give the children the stability to get through it, to get through the journey that grief is, really. It is very difficult as a parent, and what I tended to do was, I likened it to being a sponge. I just absorbed all their grief, because you have to be there to take everything from the children, and then when they went to school, you just wring yourself out and start again, basically. That's your, if you can get 2-3 hours a day, and that's your grieving period, you sit aside, and that's just your wailing at the wall time. But if you, I concentrated on the children, and that, it gives you a point and a purpose as well, because otherwise it's very easy to get lost in the circle of grief. You can go from sadness to anger, to sadness to bitterness to anger, and you can get yourself ensconced, I think, in a cycle. But if you have something to concentrate on, and the children were very much my purpose, I needed to make sure that they were getting through the day, that they felt safe, that they felt as if they had all the knowledge they needed, all the information that they needed to get them through, and to facilitate their grief, really, just to facilitate their pathway forward, whether that be with the school, health agencies, whatever, whoever I needed to be their go-between for. And that's the only way
What was the hardest part of it for you?
I think being alone, which is probably, I don't know if it's a singularly naval thing, but because we lived in Chester and Kevin was killed down in Portsmouth, you're very far away from all the support structure and the support network. I worked full time, so I had lots of contacts and a big support network in Chester, but I had no family. My parents were both dead, and although you're part of the naval family or the service family, we weren't. We were too far away. I think there are visiting officers that come back and forth to you if you're local to the area, but we were so far away. We're 4 or 5 hours from Portsmouth, or even from Helensburgh. So I think we were stuck in the middle, really, and we were just so alone.
Did you have a visiting officer?
No. When Kevin was killed, we found out, late on in the day, and Kevin's officer, his commanding officer, came the next day with a padre, took us all down to Portsmouth, and it was a very involved period then. We were down in Portsmouth for a week, going through post-mortems and body release and things like that. We came back up, but we had no real contact with anybody. I think because, again, we were so far away. There was a lady from the Navy came up who was an officer to fill in the forms from pensions and various official documentation, but that was all. We didn't have anybody who...
Was any bereavement support offered to you through the services?
None, absolutely none. That was the one thing that I managed to source. I think the services actually, I think it may have been NPFS, contacted my GP the day Kevin was killed, and he knew, gosh, I think mid-afternoon, he found out before us, but he didn't want to come and tell me because he didn't have any details. They couldn't give him details. So he popped to the house the next morning and said to me, what can I do? I'm here, what would you need? And I said, I'll need some sort of counselling for the children. I knew from what I had been through some of the journey that was going to face them, and I said, I need some proper help with this. I need some guidance on what's going to happen here, because I was very aware that I didn't want to influence them with my grief or impose my projections, I suppose. This is how you should feel, because children's grief isn't like that at all. Yeah. So I was very aware that I would need some professional help there. So bless him, he managed to
sort that
organise some counselling and a way forward there.
Telling one's children that they've lost their father
was the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life.
I'm sure.
That was worse than burying Kevin. That was worse than anything. I sat. They knew something was going on because a policeman had been to the house the night before. And then they were, best get ready for school time now. And I was like, it's okay, we're not going to school today, just have a seat. And I had to phone the school quickly and tell the school what had happened and notify them that we'd be away. Don't worry, we'd be back whenever we could. And to sit and tell them the difference in their reaction was poles apart, but harrowing nonetheless. Benjamin was very quiet. Benjamin just absorbed everything, took it all internally, and sat there very quietly and cried, where Jessica wailed a scream that I will never forget. It will take me to the grave, that scream, from such a small child. She wailed from the depths of her soul. And there's nothing you can do at that point but hug them and tell them you love them, they're as safe as they can be. But you can't take away that grief from them. And as a parent, it's terrible. It's a terrible thing to have to inflict that on your child. You're the delivery point of that pain. And that's something that will never go away. Never, never go away.
So looking back over the last few years, what's been the toughest thing?
I'm not sure on any one thing. I think just fighting for them, really. I was so disappointed that the services didn't have any counselling, and just trying to make sure that they had the support network they needed. I knew that I wouldn't be able to support them in everything. I knew that I would be not the cause of some of their grief, but certainly the person it was aimed at, and not through any maliciousness, but I knew that they would be so angry, and to try and enable them to have the space and the time to say, I hate my mum, she's driving me mad, she's doing everything, I want Dad back, I want to be able to dig the garden with Dad, he was lots more fun. That was a difficult thing, to try and get them to understand that it was okay to do, and to do with somebody else. But it was something that I knew would be really important, because I knew I was angry at Kevin, and through no fault of Kevin's. I was angry at all the things that had stopped. I was angry at all the things that had fallen over that should have happened that didn't. And that was as an adult understanding the situation. So I knew, just as their closest point of reference, that I was going to be the person that, she tells me off every day, Dad wouldn't have told me off, Dad would have said that was okay, Dad would have laughed. So I needed to have somewhere that they could go for that, and I found that really important, and I was very disappointed that there was nothing in place for the children at that point from a service point of view, because it's a very different relationship with a parent. It's a very intense relationship. People think, oh, you're fine, you only see them at weekends anyway, you're okay. But I don't think people understand that the depth of the relationship they have with a parent that's away, whether they're with them, you know, they might not see them for 3 months. But I think when they do see them, it's a very intense relationship with any service parent and their child. And there's a very definite link that sometimes isn't there with a sort of day-to-day parent. I know, fine, when I'm with Benjamin and Jessica all the time, I'm the very mundane parent. I'm the provider, the cooker, the cleaner, the do your homework person. I'm the grudge, the nudge. Whereas Kevin was the fun, the let's go swimming, let's go to the cinema, and let's not tell Mum, come on, let's sneak off for ice cream. And that was the thing they were losing. And it was...
And do you think the fact that they had a father that was often away due to his work in the services impacted on how they grieved?
Yes, I do. I do think it did. It was... I think somebody likened grief in a child to jumping in and out of puddles to me. And I do think it's very much like that. Because they would not forget that Kevin was dead, but they were more enabled to deal with day-to-day life without Kevin. They weren't used to having him there all the time. Monday to Friday, they were operational, if that doesn't sound silly. They could do their day-to-day things, but as soon as Friday afternoon hit, there was a wave of grief that just came over them, and it would last the whole weekend, because this was the time we'd be at the pictures now, or you know, we'd be going over to Anglesey today, or we'd have done this today, we'd have gone walking in the mountains today, because it was a very family centred time when Kevin was home, and it was every weekend. So that, yes, I think did make them grieve differently. I think they missed the intensity of him, but in intense bursts, if you like. It was very targeted. You could map their periods of grief and you knew when they were coming. Holidays, weekends, things like that. I think you could almost predict the worst times.
You decided that the right thing was to move home.
Yes.
And that's quite hard at the best of times.
Moving was difficult, but it was... I made a determined effort to stay in Chester, in the house, so that they had stability, because I thought that was the best thing. I thought so much has changed now in their lives. They need to be at the same school with their same friends and have all the rest of the reference points of their life. But after about 18 months, it was obvious that it wasn't helping. Jessica would get so upset. We'd go and visit family in Scotland or go for weekends away, and they'd be super. And as we got closer to Chester and closer to the house, you could just feel their mood descend. And I asked them, we sat down as a family and I discussed with them, you know, we can move, would you like to move? We have the opportunity, so if you want to, we can move. And they both said yes, it's too sad without Daddy. So that was, it was a family decision, but I think it was good to stay where we were, to give them the time that they needed to grieve. And I think we were very lucky in the fact that we had the ability to stay where we were. But yes, it was time to move, and since moving, they've flourished. They really have flourished. We've taken Kevin with us in every way that he was at home. There are photos everywhere, there are reminders everywhere. But there's not his presence in the house that there was in Chester. So that helps them a lot. And they were able to reinvent themselves in a way as well. They weren't necessarily Benjamin and Jessica whose daddy was dead. If they wanted to tell people, they could, and if they didn't, they didn't. And both of them actually made quite a conscious decision not to tell people. They let people know as they wanted them to. They didn't tell people that as a first impression.
What sort of support were you and the children given at the time of Kevin's death?
I was offered support from the chaplain and Kevin's officer when they came to actually get us, to take us down to Portsmouth. But I think the children were very much left out of it. Not intentionally, not in any way, but I don't think anybody considered that this was probably the most fundamental day of their life. That day, they lost their father. They lost a huge reference point, something that can never, ever, ever be replaced. And really, they were just tagged along. And you're so involved, there's so much organisational things going on. They want to know, do you know an undertaker? Can we get this? We've got a post-mortem to sort. We've got to quickly get to Portsmouth in 5 hours to see if we can get to the body, so you can do a viewing. We need all of these things. And you're trying to process all of that and coordinate all of that whilst still trying to care for these 2 small children. It was really, really difficult. I think they're left behind in a lot of ways, whereas they should be the most important. Now obviously it's difficult because you have to gauge it and pitch it to their age. You can have a child from 15 right the way down to a newborn baby, but they need to be recognised and they need to be involved. When we went to Portsmouth, when we were taken to Portsmouth, I had to make the decision as to whether or not the children were to view Kevin's body when he was in the morgue. And on the journey from Chester to Portsmouth in the car, I was discussing with them all the way, saying, we have this opportunity, would you like to see Daddy? I was very aware that if they didn't, would they ever really think he died? Would they think maybe he was just somewhere? Would they think one day, he was going past on a bus? Or I was very aware that they may need that, reference point. Would they need that confirmation to themselves that, this had actually happened? And then when we got to Portsmouth and into the base, the Navy took us to the base where Kevin lived, if you like, from Monday to Friday. And they said, okay, that's you, you're here. And they just stuck us in a service room. Had no duvets. It hadn't been made up. We were obviously not expected. We were in a mess with 200 other guys who all knew exactly who we were because they had all known that Kevin had been killed, who were giving us a huge exclusion zone. Bless them, they were just like, oh gosh, what do we do with these? And we just felt abandoned. And I think it's very important that perhaps somebody addresses that the children need accommodation away from their a short-term Marie quarter, somewhere with something from home, or a TV, a game, a bed with a duvet on that's not service issue, somewhere to sit and have a cuddle, because that's what they need at that point. A toaster, a kettle, silly little tiny things, but that would then get them through that evening and help you get them through the evening, because anything that can help the parent enable the child to get through that night is just worth gold. It's amazing, and I think that's something that needs to be addressed. It's not anything done through malice or ill will, it's just done through people not knowing, and hopefully that's something that can be fed up or sorted. It would be an easy thing to do. It's such a small thing, but it would make such a huge difference, because although we're taken to the place of, or certainly I was taken to the place, down to Portsmouth, but then when you're there, that's it. You're stuck. You're in limbo. I had to phone a friend the next morning and say, can we come and stay at yours? we're in HMS Collingwood, which is this huge, enormous base with the minimum of clothes and things, because you don't think to pack. You've no idea how long you're going to be there. The children are there. It's not somewhere that you can live and operate whilst trying to organise all the other things that you've got to organise logistically, really. Funerals, liaise with police, whomever you need to liaise with. So I think that's something that's really important. They need to recognise the child as much as the adult.
So life is moving on and time passes. How are things now?
It's good. The children have moved on with me. I've found a new friend. It's all very slow and very tentative, but the children have embraced my relationship with him. It's something that I didn't think they would be able to do previously, but we get to see him. We see quite a bit of him, we socialise with him, and I think that's helped the children greatly. It really helped Benjamin and Jessica, and we all talk about Kevin, so it's helped keep Kevin alive as well.